Hey, so today we are back again with the Dirtywave M8, and today we are dealing with drums because it offers so much for drum programming. Trackers always have, but the M8 has some really nice features under the hood to help us build out a drum beat for one. Got some nice instruments to work with, but we can take that drum beat off the grid and really start getting the most playing with groove and just how the tracker workflow helps our process. So enough talking about, let's get straight into it. Alright, we are here with the Dirtywave M8 and we're going to look at building some really cool drums in here. We're going to focus more on a sequencing workflow because as a tracker we have some really nice ways to set up a sequence, and we're going to look at instruments and then how we can control our groove if you want to start getting out like polyrhythms and all that more advanced stuff. But before I begin, I just wanted to start with some housekeeping, just how I manage my songs on the Dirtywave M8 or that sort of LSDJ workflow that we have. So what I like is these first 3 tracks I will mainly use for my drum, and that usually ends up being that I'll start with 40 and then use that as the basis for my drum, so I can visually see where certain parts of my music is. So I know 40 and above is all my drums, and anything from 0 to 3F, that's going to have everything else because it just visually breaks it up. Let's have a look at setting up a sequence. So I'm going to set that one to 40. So this is our first chain, and then this will be our first phrase. Now you're not going to hear audio because we haven't set up an instrument yet, and I'll leave that as like a little part in this video. But what I wanted to show was different ways that we can plot in our sequence. Now I'm going to create a very basic 4 on the floor sort of beat, but we'll show some different techniques. So the main one is that you can just use edit and the arrow keys to plot things in. If you want to change some notes, we can do that a bit later, but you can just manually enter bits in and it's going to work the way you want. Now another thing too, if you come across and set up 3 channels, so I'm just going to make this one 42 and then this one's 41. See how I'm having to come all the way back out to this song view to have a look? And this is where if you hold down option, you can press left and right and you can navigate between those channels because it knows where you are. So it's just a nice way to be able to pan through, and just having those 3 channels set up just allows me to be a little bit quicker moving around. So now I want to add my snare, and I know that's going to sit on the 4 and C, but we can use some of the generative fill features. So I'm just going to select that column and holding option again, I'm just going to press that until I get that 4 on the floor. And now that I've got that all done, you can press B to copy it, it just gets out of there. But I can just come in and delete those ones. So that's just another way to plot things in. It would be a little bit better for this one here with our drums, but say I wanted to add the hi-hat, I can do the same thing, double tap, and there we go. We have our basic sort of drum laid out and we can sort of see how everything is fitting together. So that's what I mean when you start interacting with a mate, you can get very efficient with plotting things in, just understanding how all the button combos sort of allow you to get places, and that's where I really recommend reading the manual when it comes to entering notes, understanding the device, because you're going to get so much more out of it. Now that we've got all the note information, if I hit play, we're not going to hear anything because we haven't set up any of the instruments. But before I just get into that, I'm just going to set these up. So I'm going to start them on 40. So that's number 1. We'll set this to 41. So you can use up and down to jump in increments of 1 on the left side, left or right to jump increments on the right side, because it's not decimal, it doesn't go to 10, we go to 16 through A, B, C, D, E, F. So this one, I just want to make this 42. And that's just separate everything out. So I know that my kick is 40, my snare is 41, and my hi-hats are 42. So let's just jump in there. As you can see, we can use B as well to navigate around our different instruments. But if I also hold shift and go up again, we can see all our instruments ready to go here. So let's just start with the first one. We are going to create a kick. And I think this is a good way to understand how the mate handles it, because we do have a mutable instruments or the macro synth. There are some really nice models in there for constructing sort of analog drums or synth drums. And then we have our sampler as well, so we can use that to create sample assets. So I'm just going to build one of each. So we'll probably do a kick using the kick generator. So I'm just going to go into the macro synth and then navigating through here. think yeah, there we are. So there's a bunch of different models for percussion elements in here. So you just pick the one that you want. So we want a kick. Whoops. And we'll just go over here. There we go. We have a nice kick, and really we have a lot more options to sculpt a sound that fits into what we're working in when we start playing with like analog drums or synth-based drums, because we have ways that we can sculpt it. And with how the macro synth works, usually most of the coloring or changing the texture is done with these two options. So timbre on this one is sort of like the decay of the kick, and then this one adds a bit of a transient on the start, so you can hear that click that we can control. So they are the two main ones. We can sort of sculpt it into where we want. We can come back into our phrase and we can adjust the pitch, so we can pitch our drums to what we're working on. But then we have a few other options that work with the mate workflow. So we have a couple of different ways to degrade the audio, so non-destructively adjust the sound. So this one takes bits away, so it gets a little bit more crunchy and a little bit more lo-fi. Redux as well. We have a filter, so if we have too much of a high transient or a low transient, we can use this one to sort of make it fit in place. So I can set up a low pass filter, bring that down, so we can adjust the sound that way. We have reds for it, so if you want to add a little bit of squelch. We have an amplifier, so we can boost the audio with a bunch of different ways that we can change how that clips. So a lot more options to control the sound. We can pan the sound as well, but with a kick we usually just try and keep it in the center, right in the front. And then we have the sort of volume and send signal part, because dry is like the volume of our sound. So if I turn that up, that's going to be a lot louder. If I turn that down, it's going to be quieter. So that's sort of like the dry signal going out, or that's what the main mixer is going to hear. And you'll see me adjust the instrument level here when I'm mixing to bring all the elements together, because we can mix at a level here with this option here, but it's just a lot easier to make things work together when they're tracker mixed. So we got our kick sorted. Let's have a look at making a snare. And I think for this one, what I might do is just make it using a sample, and then we can have a look at the sampler as well. So I'm just going to come across to sampler, and I'm going to load a snare sample. So it does come with a variety of different samples on here, and I'm just going to go to hits and let's pick an 808. And we want to pick the snare drum, which I think lives all the way down the bottom. And then we can use play to listen to the sound we want. So I actually like that one. So I'm just going to hit edit, and that's brought it in on top of our stuff. But if you go shift and play, you'll hear everything playing together. So if you're trying to see if something's fitting for purpose and you have like you're working in here, you can do that. Now you're probably seeing that there's a lot of similar stuff compared to the synth. We do have like that degrade, we have our filter, we have our amplifier, and we have our volumes, but it works a little bit differently because we are dealing with a sample. So sample being, it is a waveform that we can load in, and we can load in whatever sample we want here. So what we want to do is we're creating a one shot. So it's pretty much set up from the start. Like we can hear the snare here, we can adjust the detune, so we can make it a little bit more. We can do something like make it into a bit of a gated reverb, but we have options to enhance the sound that we want. So what I might do is just bump it up. Yep, a little bit crispy on top. And that is really how the sampler works. So now we have options where we could say, I'm just going to jump over to here. We could pick between samples, or we can create our synth instruments, but they just give us that flavor that we can go about making our sounds. So now we're probably going to create a hi-hat, and you can use some of the other models as well. You're not just limited to the macro synth or samples. We can use some of the other synthesizers to create something. So I've just got that pulse going, and I want to just come over here. It's going to sound weird, but what we can do is I'm just going to pick the noise. There we go. And then I want to come up here. We're going to turn this to volume, and we're just going to drop that right down to something really tiny. And then being a sort of noise based, like how Game Boys used to do it, we can raise do something like that. And then if I wanted to make it a little bit higher, I can put a high pass filter on here and just do something like that. Maybe drop the volume a little bit because it's a bit abrupt. And if we listen to all this in context, nice. So with all that, if we have a listen, we have a nice little groove going on, and this can be a drum and bass pattern. This could be any sort of drum groove that you find online, because this is following a 16-step sequencer. So you'll see those images online of different drum patterns and that. Just understanding how these can be put together, you can plot something out that is really nice and fits into the tracker workflow. But what happens if you want to start adding extra elements to a drum beat? Because like you usually see with a drum machine, there's 4 or 6 different elements, and I am currently using 3 tracks. Now I can start stacking tracks and using more for the drum beats, and sometimes I do, but this is where trackers really work out, because we have so much real estate in this section, we could add some extra flavor around that. So what I might do is I'm just going to jump across to 43, and I want to create a macro synth. Cool, so this is where trackers become really useful, because we can have channels with 2 or 3 different elements playing at once, and we still keep that sort of efficiency of 3 tracks and 5 tracks for everything else, but we can start spreading things out. But this is where we can start looking at using our effects to really drive our sound, because what happens if I want to do a bit of a reverse snare here? So what we can do is just come up here and we look at the sample, or the current instrument, and it'll give us what that current instrument has for us. And what we're actually looking for is to control that play. So it's probably labeled play, that one, play mode, and then we can set it to reverse. And we might need to tweak it a bit because there was a bit of a dead spot. So by doing that, we don't need to create a whole new instrument that is just dedicated to a reverse sample. We can just adjust that by using this property here. And if we were to listen, we've got that build up. It's probably in a bit of the wrong spot, because what I might do is just bring that down to, we'll just move some things around, and I'll move this one back up at the top. And if we listen to everything in context, and you can do this with a variety of your sounds, like you do have options to add multiple layers to what you're working on. So if I just come over here, like usually what I end up doing is having a full list so I can see all the different samples I'm working with. Make sure you name these as well, because it does help out in the end, but you can build a full drum kit and then start piecing things together in your track. So now we're starting to get into some more interesting territory, because what we've built is something that a drum machine would do really well. It's very static, very one on done. It's playing each note exactly like a machine would, but how do we go about humanizing it? And I think where we can start showing how this tracker workflow really does shine. So what I want to do is I'm going to start playing with the hi-hats, and we're going to use some of the effects to really push things around. So let's say we want to adjust the volume, like we can do that via the velocity, so we can set some of these a little bit lower. So I'm just going to, it would be nice if there was like a randomize as the other one has, so actually I'll do that as well. So what I want to do is I'm just going to select that track and then hit down, and we can create a bit of a randomization of the lot. So we have random volumes, we have random notes, so it creates a little bit more interest, but it's still very on the grid, and we can use a delay. So what I want to do, I'll keep the ones that are on the groove, so that 4 on the floor I'm not going to touch, but what I can do is come into sequence, and what I'm looking for is del, or delay, and this one just pushes things around just a slight bit. And if we have a look down here, we have our ticks and our steps. Now if you're not familiar how ticks work, this is probably a really good point to bring it up. That number lives in our groove. So what it will do, a tick is one of these. So we currently have 6, 6. It's going to play that same groove over and over again. So each step is going to be consistent of 6 ticks. So what we can do is move some things around. So say I delay that, well, it's probably a little bit too much, but we can get some little bits of bumps. And we have some elements that are falling out of the pattern just by a little amount, which just makes it feel a little bit more human. But if we come back up to this groove, this is how we can add our swing. So what I can do is holding A, if we press up and down, it's going to adjust both of those so they always consistently keep that 12. We'll talk a little bit more advanced stuff with this later, but it's just a nice way to quickly add some swing. Get a little bit wonky there, but it's just nice to be able to understand how the underlinings of this work, because you can give it way more graphical fidelity if you start bumping that up higher or lower and then adjusting the BPM. That's how we do some crazy stuff. So we'll save that for later. But there are some other things I like throwing on my hi-hats, especially repeaters. So we'll come in here and I'm just going to pick the retrig here. And then we can adjust it via those ticks. So understanding that we are working in 6, it's going to play a couple of notes. If we jump that up to 6, it should play one there. So just understanding how those ticks work, it allows us to understand how things are going to come in. So when I've got set to 6, it will put another hi-hat on 9. So if I just play that, we can hear that, but we can adjust some things. So maybe I do something like that, maybe that, and whoa. Now that's continuing on a little bit too much, so what I might do is just throw a kill command to stop that from keep going. Now if we listen to all that in context, so that's just adding a little bit of flavor, and I can come in here and do the same things to my drum beat. So what I might do is I'll just make that one a little bit less, and then I'll come in here and make these two a little bit less than the main, and then so, and you can just keep growing and amplifying. But what happens if we've only got, because we only got like a tiny little loop going, which is 1 bar of music, how can we extend that out a little bit more? And that's where we can start using chance commands to really push our sound. So what I might do is I'm just going to go back to our snare and sort of tom track. Now I want to put some chance commands on these to play around a bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to come up to here and we are looking for chance, which is CHA. And then this has a bit of context depending on where it's sitting, but what it usually does is this left value focuses on stuff that way, and this right one focuses on stuff that way. So if I just put chance commands here, here, and there, we don't hear that stuff anymore. But if I come up here, say set that to 80% of the time, maybe make that a lot higher because that is the first beat of our thing. So keep it consistency, and then if I put that around say 40%, and then I make this 60%. See how sometimes it will trigger and sometimes it won't? And that's just a really simple way of adding variation to our kits without manually having to program that in each time. Now understand, this is a live way, so it's always going to be random no matter what. It's not like you're going to bake in that sequence and it's going to stay like that forever and ever. If you want to start doing stuff like that, what would probably be better if you come in here and start cloning tracks. So using option and edit, and then you make those changes on the fly. But I've built something, let's just expand it out, and yeah, just really nice ways to humanize something and add some extra flavor. So you can take this a lot further than what I've done. There are some extra tools in there that really help out amplifying the stuff, but being able to get things off the grid and making them feel less static, it's just going to open up a lot more possibilities. So another nice trick is that we can actually start editing some of our instruments, because we have set up synth instruments as well as sample-based instruments with our hi-hat sequence. What we can do is add a nice little variable to adjust this point here. So what we can do is just holding that and going up, we can find our first decay. So we can actually adjust our mod. And what I want to do is just have that selected. Just give it a value that is close to what we were working with, which I think it was 5 or 6. And then I'm just going to drop it down on every step. And then same thing again, we can start opening things up and we can sort of sample what that line's going to sound like as we're plucking around. And that just gives us a little bit more variation to adjust our sound. Alright, so we're starting to get more into that fun territory of pushing drums a little bit outside the grid, mainly that 4 on the floor. Let's have a look at some ways to create some triplets and some other ways that we can adjust the sound. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a new chain down here, just so we can listen and change it up. So I'm just going to create a new one. And I want to start with a triplet because there's a few different ways that we can do it, but that leads nicely into some more advanced groove stuff. So what I want to do is I'm just going to pick that hi-hat, and one way that we can do it is we'll do it the sort of manual way of adjusting the track, but we can talk about how to do it with groove as well. So what I've done is I've just created a triplet. Doesn't sound like a triplet. We can do that. So what we're going to do is use that delay note to push our sounds down. So what I want to do is just pick it first. Now this one falls on the grid, the first line. The second line we're going to add 33 and then we're going to add 66 to this one, and that will push everything down so that empty block is just holding the information for our next loop. So what I want to do, we are going to get that delay. So there it is, we'll grab that. And then what we want to do is push it. I'm just going to start that on 0 so I can do the math. We will add 2 and then we will add 4. If that is right, we should hear a triplet. There we go. So what I need to do now is I'm just going to copy that region and then 1, 2, 3. And there's our triplet. So that is how we construct our manual triplet. We have to manually plot in one effects line. We're doing the calculation to figure out what steps here, so we know that's 6 ticks, and then we're spreading that across our notes so we can create that triplet sound, or we can apply that to a variety of different ratios. It's just doing a bit of math to try and plot the triplet into where it's supposed to fit. But now if you're trying to apply that to the whole song like we did up here and we applied the groove, you probably want to do it a little bit in a nicer way. So this is where we get a little bit more into that automatic. But if I come up to the project settings, so coming across the song mode and going up, this is where our groove lives. So we can apply different grooves throughout the song. There is a command FX for that, so we can adjust that on the fly. But we can set that up per track. So we can have that third track with a triplet and we don't have to do all that manual plotting. So how do we apply that groove to what we just did there? So what I might do is I'm just going to copy that line and I'm just going to paste it down here. Whoops. And we'll select it and we'll just do that. So I've got a completely new thing. I'm not destroying anything. So what are we doing here? And we're trying to recreate that same flow again, but we're going to use a groove for it. So what I want to do is I'm going to hold Option and go left. So I'm on a different groove cycle. So I'm not adjusting the default groove. So everything's not in triplets. But what I can do is I'm just going to set up 2 more. So we've got a 4-bar loop. And as you can see, we can set up entire grooves for the whole track, so we can create some really funky stuff. But I want to do the same thing. I want to take the amount off here, so that's going to be 0. Now if it's doing up and down, use left and right to manually apply the ticks, and the reason why we use up and down is because we want to keep that base 12. It just keeps everything nice and simple, but we want to add that amount evenly to each of the steps. So what I want to do is add 2 here, add 2 here, add 2 here, and they do show this inside the manual, so if you read that you'll probably be following along pretty well. But what that does is it creates that sort of thing that we did with that delay section. Now what we want to do is come into here and we are going to apply a groove to this entire track. So what I want to do is select that first one. If I hit play, we got that triplet again. But as you can see, how easy is that? We can come up here and create a whole bunch of different groove amounts and that we can apply on the fly. And say we only want that triplet to last a little bit, we can come down here, put a new command in. So we can have a lot less manual plotting in here, and we're using the functionality of the M8. Cool, so understanding that, we can open up a few other little nice options with the M8, really taking it out of the grid because it does handle it really well. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a whole new line. So when I hit play, there's nothing going to play. But what I want to do is set up one here, and then I'll set one up here. And then I should be able to navigate between the two back and forward. So what I want to do is I'm going to set up, I'll set up a groove here, and we'll say 2. And we'll set up a groove here, and we'll call that 3. And what I'm going to do is put a note, do kick, and then I'll come back over here. Just doing a little bit of housekeeping to get this to a point, but we're going to look at polyrhythms because, as you can see, things are on the grid, but we want them to slowly get out of the grid. But we can use the groove to handle our polyrhythm. So these tracks will get out of phase, and we are pushing the mate into out of grid territory. So use it sparingly and make sure that you always hit that reset on the chain so it all lines back up again. But what we can do is we can come up here. I'm just going to set this one and say I want to create a polyrhythm of, say, 4. And then this one, I want to create a polyrhythm of 5. And then what you do is you create a null, cue, and then we create another one. Cool. So as you can see, that one's playing like that, and that one's playing like that. And if we play them together, and that's how we create a polyrhythm. And this is really fun to do with generative stuff on the M8, like you're wanting sequences to get out of whack. You can create these lines of just different melodies and different percussive elements. It's just understanding that these notes are null and void now, and we can create tiny little sequences in here. So I can do something like that. So with those two together, we can hear that polyrhythm going, and they'll keep going on forever. And this is a really cool technique when you start getting into generative territory, because it takes the mate and takes it off the grid, and you can create these short little sequences with different timings and different grooves and apply different effects to create something that sounds really unique and out there. But when it comes to live plays, like you can set up a really cool generative little session and then live play and bring things in and out. But if you have different polyrhythms going, they're going to trigger at different times. So what you want to do, if you want to make a transition, just make sure that you double press play, because what's going to happen is one sequence is going to finish, this one might still be going, and it's going to create this 4/4 timing up here to go as part. So I'm just going, and that's going to make sure that the mate will short circuit and say play all this at once, which is just a nice way to bring it all together. So I hope you have a lot of fun with this one. So polyrhythms are a lot of fun, but if you're wanting to stay on the grid, they can be a little bit troublesome as you play, but this is a nice, neat little trick just to keep on the grid. So what I want to do is I'm just going to create what I call a fake out. So it's like a polyrhythm, but we create like a sort of glitch that jumps into the next rhythm. So it's still 16 steps, but we can create our sound. So I'm just going to create it down here, and we'll create a new one, and we'll use a hi-hat. Actually, we'll use that one. But what you can do is use this fill and create your polyrhythm. So maybe something like that. Actually, so this is kind of what I'm talking about, is you have this note down the bottom that helps lead into that next section. So it's still 16, but it's got that flavor of like an off-centered beat, and then you create like a little glitch to do it. So you can do that via that way, or you can do the math to do the spacing correctly and then have your little fake out on this one to create that repeating. But what that does is it allows you to keep on the grid and do something special. So with all that said, you can take all these concepts and make a really interesting groove. You can create some fun, you can get polyrhythms, you can do all that good stuff. But I think to finish off this video is to show how to manage odd time signatures, because it does add a lot more to our songs and really in that sort of groove territory. But it takes the concepts we've already learned through this video. So I've set this one with an odd time signature. We can create our own little rhythm, but really what we are doing is doing the same stuff we did before. We are creating a odd time signature using the groove functionality. So as you can see, we've got C, which means 12. So I've doubled half the speed, but I'm using that to play on the different ticks. So if I just go through the different parts, you can see how it's being managed. So it's going to move a lot slower than our other ones. But what you can see is we've got this new command up here, which is our global groove. So if that one lives there. So once that one's hit, the whole mate will use that groove entirely. So that's like coming in here and changing that number there. And you can do that through the song. So if you're having like a prog rock thing or getting really complex, you can have a bunch of these line up and you can create different sequences. It's just respecting that number to make sure it adds up to a comparison of 12 in the end. But when you do stuff like this, you can do some tricky things because this is playing at half speed. I've done some retrigs to like have notes in between, and you can go through the process of really amplifying stuff, but that allows you to really expand out. And one thing I do like to do, especially for global variables, I'll leave them in the third FX column as far off the other side of our mate. So it's usually going to end up somewhere here where I can control the groove. So I can see visually when I'm playing this screen, as things are ticking down, it's going to create that. Another cool little trick that you can do on the mate, if you triple press B, it's going to highlight that red. So it just makes it more apparent when that's going to happen. So in the end, I hope you enjoy this one, because really they are the building blocks to taking a very basic drum beat and adding so much more flavor on it. Like you probably found a drum beat that you're wanting to plot in on the Dirtywave M8, or you have an idea, you have a loop, but you're just wanting to add some extra flavor on top. They will help you out. They will take your drum loop from something basic to a lot more. So I hope you did enjoy this one. And if you did, definitely give it that thumbs up. It does help the algorithm to point this content to other people. People that are probably trying to learn how to put a drum groove on this thing. And it really does help out get it to them to see. And if you did have any comments or queries, please feel free to leave them down below in the comments. I do try and go down there and answer as much as I can. And I didn't cover aim and breaks. I'm going to do that in a future video alongside with a range of tutorials to support this device. The overview was just like go straight over the crop as quickly as possible, but I want to dissect a lot more because this has a lot to offer. So if you're looking for that, I hope to see you next time.